Well, good day, and I must welcome everybody to this conversation. We have as our guest today, Colin Morris. I feel like saying Captain Colin Morris, although he has retired. Colin was a police reservist for 32 years. He spent his life as a policeman, despite the fact that he never got paid a cent for it. In his real life, he actually is an electrical engineer. And for many years, for about 20 years, he worked with what I call the CPU, or the Child Protection Unit. And I know it's got a slightly different name now, Colin. Maybe you can alert us to that. But I think it is quite important as well that apart from being a professional person in his own right, he has also qualified as a detective. He has done a master's degree in child witnessing from the Nelson Mandela University. It was the NMMU. Now they've dropped one of the M's. Colin, I just want to say welcome, thank you. And what is the correct name of the CPU? Because it's something that has always tripped me up whenever I try to explain that to somebody.
Thank you, and thank you for having me this afternoon. Yeah, the CPU, or the Child Protection Unit, is what it started called many years ago. And then it was identified that abuse against women and sexual abuse against everybody was very rife and was rife. So the unit changed its name from CPU to FCS, Family Violence, Child Protection and Sexual Offences Unit. And in saying that, of course, we would have to answer the telephone. Family Violence, Child Protection, Sexual Offences Unit, gesinsgeweld, kinderbeskerming, seksueel misdrijf, ondersoekeenheid. And the person on the other, is that the CPU? And clearly that is the same thing. So the CPU morphed itself, if you want to call it, into a bigger unit where we dealt with sexual offences against anybody in South Africa. And that was really in line with the Constitution, because the sexual offences were recognised as being very much unconstitutional, obviously. And there were a number of changes within the Constitution that changed the laws around sexual assault on men and sexual assault on body parts, that became quite important, that there was a specialized unit to look after it. So FCS stroke GKS is what we were known as.
Well, thank you for that. As I say, I'm still somehow stuck in the old days where I know of the Child Protection Unit, but I am aware of those rather important changes in the law. And it's actually amazing to be able to speak to somebody who has not just read about it as I have done, but to actually walk the walk and talk the talk. 32 years as a police reservist. How did you start off as how did you become a reservist? Why did you do that?
That's a trick question, because, there's also a funny answer to this, is that I had the desire to help the community. I had a desire to do something and didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I walked into Brixton Ambulance and I said to them there, can I be a paramedic reservist with you? And they said, yes. Why don't you go and join the police? So I said, no, I actually want to be a paramedic. So that I joined Johannesburg Emergency Services as a paramedic. And in the meantime, in the back of my mind, I thought, this is a good idea. Let me go to the police as well. And I walked into my local police station and joined them. And at the time, that was illegal, because you weren't allowed to be a reservist for both emergency services and the police. But I joined there because I'd had a desire to do something good for the community. And it just happened. And then I joined, and I was in uniform for a number of years at the local police station. And just around about now, jumping over walls and chasing drunken drivers. And I looked for something more special. And at the time, if you remember, I'm sure you remember, is that there was lots of firearms around. I approached the then firearm unit, I approached SUNUP, and by mistake, I walked into the Child Protection Unit and I met Colonel Botha. Colonel Botha said, "Susan, wat soek jy nou?" And I said, "I want to join you." Said, "Okay, but I want to soek jy 'n reservist hierson." And I said, "Well, that's cool. Let me try." Anyway, I sat down with them at the first parade, and that was the beginning of 20 odd years of working with the Child Protection Unit. From there, I was the second only reservist to join. Then we had around about 18 reservists, and the reservists of Johannesburg Child Protection Unit, FCS unit, ran the units on the weekends. We did all the cases, we did all the duties on a weekend, and managed the Johannesburg FCS for a number of years.
And you did all of that without receiving a cent from anybody?
Without receiving a cent. And then some years back, when there was talk about us being paid, all of us at the FCS reservists actually signed a document stating that we did not want to be paid, even though being in excess of 300 hours a month in extra duties. And I was doing Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays, standby duties and investigative duties. My members were coming on a Friday night and leaving on a Sunday evening, doing standby duties, complete weekends. I would take over on Christmas Day and New Year's Day to give the permanent members off, and I'd work those periods. I'd work, as I didn't celebrate Easter and Christmas, I would work Easter for the permanent members.
And on a totally different level, I don't know that many police reservists who have actually risen into the officers ranking. I mean, how many reservists are there that are actually, that could call themselves captain, or higher? I mean, what as a reservist? I mean, you know, you also had to obviously go through all those courses in order to rise through the ranks. Am I correct?
No, okay. So there are a number of officers that has now changed. So the new standing orders say that a reservist is a reservist and he doesn't get rank.
Yeah.
But in the previous years, there were you could have got rank, but it was the same as what a permanent member would have called beerbaan bevordering. In other words, be process. What's bevordering in Engels? Promotion.
Promotion. There you go.
Ja,
dit would have been wat net beter sê in Afrikaans, nie waar nie.
En niemand sal glo my moedertaal is Engels.
Well, I mean, your Afrikaans is very good. I actually yesterday when I set up the interview, you actually you spoke to me in Afrikaans for a very long time, and I was actually quite amazed to hear that you are actually English speaking. Colin, one of the,
if I can just clarify that, so that
yes, yeah.
There are a number of officers in the older reservists, and there was no qualifications. You just had to have been promoted. I, however, did do, and a bunch of my members did do, as you correctly said earlier, the detectives course. A bunch of us did the child protection unit course, and we did it. We were also very fortunate. We did it part-time. So the detectives course we did part-time over a 6-month period because we were working in between. And the child protection unit, I had to take a week's leave, and we did a week's worth of child protection unit course. So we were fully qualified, not me, a bunch of the members that worked with me, all 18 of them at one stage, were all qualified to do the work that we were doing. We were well qualified to do the work.
Colin, I do want to ask you about the whole idea of specialized units within the police, because, you know, just from a lay perspective, from a civilian perspective, you know, there were specialist units, then they were disbanded. Then, you know, where are we at the moment in terms of specialized units for the police? Because the Bobby on the beat seemed to have at one stage had to do absolutely everything, and then that was once again changed back. Am I correct? There's a different approach again. Or am I being completely off kilter?
No, you're perfectly right. I think that the thought behind it was correct. If I just talk about the CPU or the FCS, Johannesburg FCS dealt with 25 police stations around Johannesburg. So we'd, on a standby duty, I would work from Douglasdale to Jeppe, from Cleveland to Randburg. So what they did was that they remanaged, they didn't disband, they remanaged the FCS, and they moved all the FCSs to station level.
Yes.
And then the Bobby on the beat actually had to do a lot of work. And when they did that, that was quite not as well done as should have been, because there were lots of stations that didn't get FCS members. There were lots of stations that had to quickly train FCS members. At the same time, in that same era, SANAB, or the South African Narcotics Bureau, was disbanded in the police and went to the Hawks. At the same time, motor vehicle theft unit was kind of disbanded. So a lot of the murder and robbery was disbanded. So a lot of the spec units definitely have been disbanded. Some of them went into the Hawks, or into the Hawks sort of area, excuse me, but most of them didn't.
I am quite keen to, I mean, we could speak about child protection and family violence for a very long time, because it's a burning issue, but in question burning is actually what I want to talk to you about as well. And that is riot policing. Now, I do know that was not your speciality, but as a police member of 30 years duty, you must have had some experience of riot policing. So my question on the one hand is, while we're looking at what's happening in South Africa at the moment, my question is, do we have specialized units that are actually able to deal with the situation that we have seen, or is it just so unimaginable what we have seen that nobody could have foreseen it? It's a bit of a difficult question to formulate, but do we have the specialized units to deal with large crowds that go haywire in the police?
Okay, so before I answer that question, and I won't forget to get back to the most important burning question, but before I answer that, the police worldwide is always seen as a thin blue line.
Yes.
And my experience of riotous situation, one of my worst experiences was in Alexandra Township some years ago. We arrested a rapist who had allegedly raped a child, and the populace decided that they were going to murder him. They were going to take the law into their own hands. And clearly we were not allowing that. So me and one other stood between 200-300 people, one guy behind us, and we asked him nicely to please go away, because we were not interested in handing him over for mob justice. And we managed to do that. My other experience, which is for me it's a famous experience, is that in 1994, just after the Shell House massacre, I was fortunate enough to be driving a little VW Golf, and I gave, what's nou begeleiding in English?
Oh, yeah, it's one of those other words that you can't actually.
So I gave back.
It's when you yes,
all right, it'll come to both of us in a minute. But I gave begeleiding to a mob of Zulus that left Library Gardens to return to Alexandra Township.
Yes,
Me and one other in a little VW Golf. We drove in front of them. And I don't know, for the listeners who know Johannesburg, we were coming down Death Bend on Louis Botha Avenue, and the Induna stopped and he said, "Hey, Sergeant, my people are thirsty. Can we get water?" I said, "Sure." And we stopped. The guys all went onto their haunches. Two of us, two policemen, two white policemen had about 500 Zulus behind, chanting, banging, really angry. They got onto their haunches and they took their buckets, and I went into the house across the road and I knocked on the door, and this little old lady opened the door and said, "Yes, what can I?" I said, "These guys want water." She looked outside. She had a heart attack, slammed the door and said, "Help yourself." But the respect between me, the two of us, and Induna and the rest of there was absolute infinite. So therefore they listened to us. There was no looting. There was no destruction of property. We begeleided them all the way from Library Garden. It's unimaginable.
Yes,
Well,
yes.
We begeleided them all the way just to the edge of Alex, where the public order policing took over there. And that leads into the next part of the question. is the fact that do we have people to deal with it? Yes, we do. So within the police, there's the public order policing, and we had the FIFA World Cup here. There was there were police members specifically trained for mob violence, for violence, specifically trained. So there definitely is units, and there's definitely trained people that should be dealing with this. Whether they're still active and whether they're still out there is a different question, but the public order policing definitely do still have units and are available and should be activated and out there. And they are trained to deal with this. They shouldn't be shooting at people. They should be dealing, and I use my personal example as a reason that you can talk crowds down.
May I briefly explain to you how I see an escalated mob approach? Sorry, it's a clumsy way of saying it, but I think you've explained it, that the first approach is actually mutual respect. Is the mob who actually says, guys, this, could we talk about this? Could we help you? And obviously, when the next approach would potentially then be police members in riot gear with shields and batons, and actually just kind of just standing guard and actually just looking fierce without doing anything. And then you could obviously, if that doesn't work, you could escalate to tear gas. If that doesn't work, there would be your water cannons. Then you could use rubber bullets. You could even use buckshot. That's a very long way before you get to a Americana situation where we actually shoot live ammunition. Am I correct? I'm obviously not. I did do a small course many decades ago, but I'm not saying that to impress anybody, because I'm a complete lay person. I'm trying to understand the approach.
And I particularly didn't mention Americana, but Americana should never have happened. Yeah. Americana was a perfect example of a very bad operation, because those qualified tactical people that I spoke about were available, and the units that were activated there were the wrong units. They're known as the Amaberet in the townships. They trained like the army. To get the army active in townships now is reminiscent of apartheid era South Africa. We're a democracy. We should be having democratic processes in place to manage this. So the Americana Massacre was a perfect example of a badly managed situation.
Now, I want to,
in my opinion, of course.
Yes, well, I mean, I think, yeah. Anyway, I agree. but okay. Now, I think there are two questions that I want to add to that. The one would be, I have personally seen in local where I live, one does see the I would suggest well qualified, well specced out, well decked out police people dealing with riot situations. One example I can think of is a while ago, there were quite a number of problems in Grabo, which is a few hundred kilometers from my house. And as a journalist, one would sometimes go there and take a few pictures and speak to the people. And I can actually remember one specific morning after a long night at the Shell garage there, I just saw a number of police people kind of looking extremely exhausted. And I decided not to take out my camera because I felt it would be wrong. I wanted to show the exhaustion on the one hand. On the other hand, I was scared that people would actually say, "Ja, typisch, nee, daar lê die mense alweer in slaap," which is actually exactly what I didn't want to show. But Colin, I mean, the dilemma is that, and this is the question now. Obviously, is we now saw wanton destruction. We saw members of the community taking the law in their own hands, forming small, what you could call vigilante groups to protect their suburbs, etc., etc. And technically, that would be illegal. But what do you think could have been done differently, if anything, with the past in the riots here. And maybe I should just say this. I mean, EWN the other day played a clip where there was a very interesting incident in Alexandra. And somebody who walked from Diepsloot through Alexandra to his work actually said, there are 4 police stations on Alexandra, and here we are, not a single policeman in sight. And he was in the middle of people actually just taking stuff in and out of shops, or not in, taking out of shops. Obviously, on the one hand, we're talking about a massive scale, but on the other hand, could it have been dealt with differently? I know it's very easy for a little civilian like myself to sit down from my computer and say blah blah blah, but you know, you've got experience, and you know, as a member of the public, could I ask for better protection? You know, not me, but I mean the person whose shop was looted. I'm asking because I actually don't know where the thin blue line, how thick that line is.
Again, you correctly say it's a very difficult comment to make, and I'm making it based on also sitting in a desk at home, etc. But without a doubt, there's definitely the face of the policeman missing out at these different places. And that's sadly why lots of the communities have now taken the law into their own hands. There's a lot of vigilantism, which is really very, very scary. And the reason why they're doing that is because they don't feel that the present police service is able to cater for their needs, and that the policeman isn't being seen out there. You mentioned a little earlier about, you know, real tired policemen. I know of many, many very competent, very good police people at the moment. But where were they? Why wasn't everyone activated? Why weren't all the reservists activated? Why wasn't POP sent in, the public order policing sent in? They were just not seen. All the clips that I have been seeing, you don't see the police. You just see vigilantes out there, which is so, so scary.
Well, that is exactly kind of my problem. And on the one hand, I mean, if you, I did mention Andrew Brown earlier today. I've just published an article with him where he was quite vociferous, if I can even say, very blunt is perhaps a better term, in saying, no, you can't actually be a vigilante, it's wrong. And yes, obviously that's what the law says. He is correct, but there was kind of a question in many people's backs, but you know, if we don't deal with it, what else? Can I ask a very different question? Because the way I understand policing, and again, this is now from a very theoretical point of view, is that the police have got 3 different parts. On the one hand, you've got preventative policemen. That's the Bobby on the beat to make sure that, you know, people don't do nasty things. Then obviously you've got reactive policing, which is where you've been a specialist. Reactive policing would be, you know, once a crime has been committed, is to bring that person to justice, the perpetrator, and to help the victim, of course. And again, I mean, we're in the presence of a great person. And then, of course, there is intelligence. And am I correct that those are 3 legs of a solid police force, of a solid police service? And if so, how are we seeing that happening in South Africa at present?
Well, we're not. You're absolutely right. Proactive, reactive, and intelligence policing is vitally important. We heard today that Minister Chele says that he knows of 15 people who were behind this, and they knew it before. If they knew it before, this should have been put in place. I think that's again a massive failure. Number one, and number two, well, the moment that this started on Saturday, everyone should have been mobilized, and everyone should have been when I say everyone in the police should have been mobilized. Everyone should have been reacting, and the quieter areas should have been sending their members to the more volatile areas. None of that happened. None of that appeared to have happened. So there was, in my opinion, I didn't see any intelligence. There certainly was very poor reactive, and the reaction even is equally as poor. And that's why the country is burning. I mean, the media is talking about South Africa burning. We're burning.
And I mean, there are certainly are places that are burning, and our economy is in trouble. You have mentioned something now which I do want to address, and this is very important because on Monday night, President Ramaphosa signed an order that 2,500 members of the army would go in to assist the police. Now, I can see from your reaction that it's not entirely something that you are excited about, but could you explain to me why, as a police person, you would prefer that not to happen? And I do know, for instance, that it's interesting that Julius Malema also, he was quite angry about that. He said, you know, we don't want soldiers in our streets, you know, and so on the one hand, there are people cheering the soldiers on. I know in small towns in KwaZulu-Natal, they actually brought relief because for the first time in many nights, last night people slept because there are actually soldiers stationed in the streets. That's reality on the ground. Whereas members of the police with whom I've spoken, and you are the only one who are able to appear on camera because you have retired, but I've spoken to a number of people and all of them are somehow reluctant to have the army in their ambit. Could you explain to us why?
Well, it's quite simple. An army by any definition is trained to kill. An army, a defense force, even the word defense force means that they train to go to war and train, and that shouldn't be happening, number one. Number two, it's reminiscent of apartheid South Africa. That shouldn't be happening. And number three, if we look at the pandemic that we're in, is that the army was sent into the towns early last year or mid last year, and there were numerous cases of them being overbearing, their power being misused. So the army should not be deployed into the situation. The police should have the capabilities of doing it, and they should be deploying the police first to get to this, to sort this out, in my opinion. An army is designed for war.
Well, your words are being echoed by a number of police people whom I've spoken to, and as I say, they are just not allowed to speak to me on camera. Colin, I want to wrap this up because I really want to thank you for the time that you've spent. This is for our listeners' sake. I mean, this is not the only conversation that Colin and I have had. In order to prepare for this, Colin actually spent a lot of time helping me to understand the situation so that I could ask somehow intelligent questions to you, and I thank you for that. Finally, is there hope? If you were to become an advisor to the Minister of Police, what would you say to, you know, what's next? What do we do in our present situation to help? Do we go back to respect?
Well, absolutely. So the policemen in the street, I'm on about 17 WhatsApp groups, and everybody's saying, where are the police? Oh, the police are stealing. And then you see the different clips of police people who've been caught stealing. There's a police van that was used in a looting operation. I mean, the thin blue line has to gain the respect that every police force service worldwide has. Again, that respect is lost. And it's lost because there is I don't believe that there's a real focus anymore. That is lost. So the members of the public don't have the respect for the police anymore. And this chaos that we're sitting in at the moment is an example of that.
Well then, I want to say thank you. I don't have a beret on, I can't salute you. Otherwise I would have said, Captain, my captain. I really appreciate the time that you took. And from all of us here at LitNet, I really just want to say thank you for your time and for being willing to speak to us. Go well.
Thank you.